Anybody else still have that harsh reality that you woke up on a Sunday morning and realized for the second straight year, the SEC is not playing in a national championship? It stinks. I understand. But ladies and gentlemen, we will all get through it together. And we got a whole bunch of 8 months to go ahead and regroup and put ourselves back in the conversation to be the team and the conference that just means more. Welcome on into Sunday Funday. It's Cole Thompson here. Make sure that you like the video, hit the ring notification, of course, subscribe to the channel, because college football and the SEC might be over, but these type of videos, they're not going away anytime soon. Every single Sunday, live 10:30. We'll go for about 30 to 45 minutes, breaking down everything that happened in the SEC. So make sure that you are locked on and you subscribe to the channel. Follow me at Mr. Cole Thompson. Follow us on all the social media channels, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter at SEC Unfiltered. Download the podcast version of the show and check out all of our great work found at SECUnfiltered.com. Yes, the college football season is over, but we still have a jam-packed program for you. What about Texas went wrong in the Cotton Bowl? You know, you saw the moments that were almost trending in the right direction, and then sadly, it just went south when you didn't need it to. What's the legacy of Quinn Ewers? There's a report. He says he's going to the NFL. Is he actually leaving Austin? And when he does, how will we remember him on the 40 acres? Transfer portal is not closed, but we are nearing down to the finish line. Who are the biggest winners so far? And we have to talk about Alabama, because Alabama did something this past week that I don't think enough people are paying attention to, and I don't think that they're going away quietly. So let's not waste any time. Texas, 14. Ohio State, 28. You get what I was trying to say. Mix that up. People are going to say this was an outlier of a game, that absolutely Ohio State dominated, that Ohio State put it boot to ass. They took the belt buckle, and they branded the Longhorns down in Arlington, where cactus don't grow. And I got in a big Twitter fight about that, but regardless, that wasn't really the case. If you want to go back and look at the history books, they're going to say, well, it was a secure win. Well, it was an easy win, and 14 points covering the spread. Ohio State dominated that game. And then you actually go back and you watch it and you realize, no, this was a four-quarter battle like many people expected. Nobody should be shocked by the outcome. Ohio State, one of the best teams in college football for 2024. Yes, they had a bad showcase because they tried to be against the grain in the Michigan matchup, and they didn't beat Oregon on the road by 1 point. But Ohio State was always good enough to win a title. They were built to win a title last year. They were built to win a title this year. They had the momentum, they had the inertia, and they had the mojo to be able to dismantle anybody, which is exactly what they did going into this matchup down in Arlington. Here's the other thing. Nobody should be shocked by this outcome. So many people said that Texas was going to walk into a buzzsaw of concerns and mediocrity and not be able to hold their own against the Buckeyes. And all the way down until a 4th and goal stop, this was a competitive game. This was a game that had its lows. This was a game that had its highs for both teams. So if you are a Texas fan, just remember that at the end of the day, regardless of what the scoreboard says, remember what you watched all the way up until the 2-minute warning or the 2-minute timeout, however you want to call it. If you're Texas, I'm not saying be upset. I'm also saying don't not be upset. Feel content in a certain way, because at the end of the day, when you look at the numbers, they actually boded well in your favor. If I were to tell you that Jeremiah Smith, the 5-star phenom, the super talented playmaker that put boot to ass against Tennessee and Oregon, the week before, I might also add in, an Oregon team that was number 1 undefeated, had 1 catch for 3 yards, you'd feel pretty good. If I told you your defense had more sacks on Will Howard than anybody else in the playoffs, you'd feel pretty good. If I told you they had more tackles for losses, they held Ohio State to its lowest rushing total, that they only allowed 30% of third down conversions, you'd feel pretty good. And if I told you they got a forced turnover against a team that was playing red hot offensively, you would feel pretty good. Unfortunately, it wasn't enough. It's not like Texas didn't have its chances. Let's start there. Texas 100% had opportunity after opportunity to strike, and they gained momentum because of the self-inflicting wounds on Ohio State. If I told you that 9 penalties, my apologies, for 54 yards against a team that had everything going its way, boded in favor of Texas, well, at least you would say this would be a 4-quarter battle, and it was. The Travion Henderson flag, the personal foul, that kind of negated a little bit of that momentum that Ohio State had on that drive. They were forced to punt. It breathed new life into the defense. The 4th down run by Arch Manning for a 16-yard gain kind of caught Ohio State slipping a little bit. What happened on the very next play? Silas Bolden goes for 24. Jaden Blue, 3 plays later, he's in the end zone for a 17-yard touchdown. We got a tie game. The second half, you came out swinging defensively. PK had this unit reeling and dealing at the right time. 34 yards in the entire third quarter. It was like somehow Ryan Day grabbed the wrong playbook, the one that he used in the Michigan game, and brought it out into our AT&T Stadium. Like, imagine that just for a second. That's what we were talking about in this game. And you also got a turnover. You also just couldn't find a way to close the gap. And that's really where it was. The problems that followed Texas all season long in crucial games were all on display in this one. The inability to run the football and the inability to play a four-quarter offensive performance. That really was the difference in this matchup. Every single loss that Texas had this year. So Georgia, and Ohio State. So two teams that many people thought at the start of the year could be playing in Atlanta for a national championship. You finished with less than 70 rushing yards. You finished with 3 yards per play. In the Georgia game first time around in Austin, you had 29 rushing yards, 1.1 yard per play. The second time around down in Atlanta, 31 rushing yards, 1.1 yard per play. And Ohio State, you had 58 rushing yards, 2 yards per play. Teams at this point in the season, teams at this moment in the year, you have to be able to be complementary. If you're not that, you're not going to win. And that's kind of the common knowledge. A team like Ohio State doesn't run the football with these, but I'll tell you what, when they needed to run the football, they were able to get a couple of big-time runs. And I'm not saying that that was a problem with Steve Sarkisian, but I will say that multiple times this year, it felt like that they were trying to pull away from the rushing attack when they probably should have just leaned into it a little bit more. But I digress from that. You weren't able to run the football. Because of that, you put pressure on Quinn Ewers to have to deliver. You know who Quinn is at this point. He's not changing after 3 years of starting in Austin because of you're now at the 1 yard line trying to go ahead and punch your ticket to a national championship. He doesn't have great pocket awareness. He has some moments where there are some highs and some lows. He makes some really good throws. He makes some really errant ones. But having pressure does put more on him. And the offensive line had its highs. The offensive line, Cam Williams, definitely not playing at 100%, got himself in a little bit of trouble. And lo and behold, they got 9 tackles for losses. They had 4 sacks on the day. Pressure was the ultimate difference in this game. And it happened on both sides too. Don't think for one second that Will Howard wasn't feeling the pressure. 2 sacks, 5 tackles for losses. And by the way, on 3 of those plays, they were nearly interceptions, including the one that was an interception by David Benda. Pressure came. You want to know where pressure didn't come? On the Travion Henderson 75-yard touchdown run. And those 2 plays ultimately were such a difference in this matchup. It didn't help that you lost Matthew Golden. That was a big-time deal. A lot of people realized that Matthew Golden, by the end of the year, had become Quinn Ewers' favorite weapon. He was a guy that absolutely needed to make plays. And when you didn't have him for the second quarter, you then had to turn to Ryan Wingo. You had to turn more to Gunnar Helm. You had to turn more to DeAndre Moore. And they understand their assignments. They understand their roles. But much like in any single movie, they are the supporting cast members. They can carry a little bit of the scene, but they're not always going to be the scene stealers. They may have a high moment, but they're not the ones that most people go and pay the tickets for. And so when you weren't able to build that relationship and you had to trust your running backs to be your leading receivers, ultimately, it kind of shot you in the foot. You got him back for the last couple drives. Guess what happened? You were able to put yourself inside the red zone because of the 2 big-time catches by Matthew Golden. But not having him out there, it was a little bit different because you didn't have the X factor the way that Ohio State does. Ohio State has 2 wide receivers in Emeka Egbuka and Carnell Tate. And if you put them on 127 other rosters, they are easily the first and foremost favorite. They're easily the go-to guy. Here, they're role players. So they could afford to not have a guy like Jeremiah Smith have a big-time game because all you need was number 2 and number 17 to step on up and deliver clean performances. What was the main difference in this game? Texas is basically, in my opinion, a 3-pitch guy. And I don't mean to bring up baseball references, but Texas, when you think about it, is a team that can easily trust its fastball, has a slow pitch, and usually a 2-seamer. Ohio State has a 4th. Ohio State was able to run the football more efficiently. Ohio State was able to pass the football more efficiently. They were better this season on special teams, and their defense was able to get a couple of turnovers and pressure. And that was the game. Texas was able to get pressure. Texas was able to throw the football efficiently at times, and they didn't miss a field goal, maybe because Bert Auburn wasn't out there. But still, one was a 3-pitch, the other one was a 4-pitch. Now we got to talk about the play. We got to talk about the play. Everyone knows which one I'm talking about. 2nd and goal. Texas, it's frustrating because in the sense, Steve Sarkisian reminded me of a pitcher that was close to a perfect game and decided to switch things up. Sometimes you get into your head too much. I do this all the time. I think that I'm not doing something right. I think that I'm overreacting. I need to change up some things. And ultimately, I go off my script and it ends up biting me in the ass. I don't have a good show, and I don't do a good performance for you. Which, by the way, if you're still watching this, make sure that you like the video, hit the ring notification, and follow me down below. And also, if you really want to, subscribe to the channel. It takes like 2 seconds, and by the way, you'll appreciate it because of this content's free, and it always will be free. So don't waste on that type of instances. Still, see, you catch me slipping, trying to come up with a new way to say something. That was Steve Sarkisian. He's just like a closing pitcher. You have the perfect game locked up. All you got to do is just continue to throw the fastball. Nobody is going to be able to stop you. And the thing that I had praised Steve and this Texas team all year about was their ability to not only recruit, but develop trench play. Easily develop trench play. And they did that miles better than Oklahoma. The reason why Texas was so good in year one was because they were able to get that type of play from their offensive and defensive line. And they have guys waiting in the wings, guys who were built for the SEC. Last season, Texas was masquerading as a Big 12 team because they had an SEC offensive and defensive line. And you had them. So why not use them? That's the big thing. When you have that type of talent, you have to properly utilize it if you want to be successful. And lo and behold, you weren't able to. Down at the 1 yard line, after you get a pass interference call, so you move from the 2 yard line to the 1 yard line because Matthew Golden is being held, this is where you corral the box. And I understand. You don't have a Tavondre Sweat, a 360-pound defensive lineman that is able to boot, scoot, and boogie like Brooks and Dunn into the end zone for an easy 6 points. You don't have that guy on your team. But what you do have are 4 or 5 other offensive linemen, defensive tackles, who are 4-star, 5-star talents that could come on in and deliver one block. And if you're down at the 1 yard line, you outwork Ohio State. And I understand. I've seen a lot of the comment section tell me that Penn State tried to do it against this defensive line at the 1 yard line, and they were unsuccessful. Well, if you're unsuccessful, and you don't deserve to win the game. But at the same time, you know what works and you know what doesn't. And the play design on the outside, I'm not a coach. I'm not inside that locker room. I don't understand what was the reasoning with Arch Manning, why he wasn't in for maybe that drive. But regardless, we're allowed to question the play calling. I'm not going to say that it was the wrong play call because of when you're right, everyone praises you. When you're wrong, everyone blames you. In the moment, maybe Steve Sarkisian thought it was the right play call, but you're allowed to question it. Especially when you look at what this offensive and defensive line with the depth and the talent that they have there. And because of that, you showed your card, you put yourself behind the sticks, you knew you had to pass on the last 2 plays, and ultimately there goes Jack Sawyer for an 87-yard touchdown run, which congratulations, by the way, Ohio State fans. I know some of you are watching. That now is in the history books as the longest run by a fumble return for a touchdown in the history of the college football playoff. So Jack Sawyer, who really had become the face of the flag planting moment out in the matchup against Michigan, he now gets redemption, and he's pretty close to probably winning a national championship. So that's a good sign for him. The thing is that there's going to be a lot of people that say Steve Sarkisian is in over his head, that Steve Sarkisian is not the right guy for this job. Yeah, we're going to live in the moment, and I completely understand that. And I even got to talk to some Texas people last night, and they were telling me that, Cole, we need to move off of Steve Sarkisian from the play calling standpoint, from a personnel standpoint. We got to make some changes. Guys, do you remember what Texas was before Steve Sarkisian arrived there? They had one 10-win season since 2009. They had one 3,500-yard passer since 2009. On top of that, they also weren't able to develop the offensive or defensive line, which is why you never saw talent go on day one, like you will this year with Kelvin Banks, and like you did last year with Byron Murphy, and you never won a conference championship. In 2 years, Steve Sarkisian has won a Big 12 title. He's taken his team, regardless of the talent that he faced moving up in the system this year, because you can only control what narratives are given to you, not the ones that are created by the outside world. Went 11-1 in conference play in the SEC in his first season and took his team to the semifinals. Went further than the team that beat them twice. That says something. That's a guy that is doing the right things. He has a top 10 recruiting class, back-to-back years, for the first time since 2013 and 14. He also has one of the better overall recruits that are coming on, and he's retaining talent. The talent that's leaving is not going to have a role moving forward. The talent that's staying is. And by the way, there's a ton of players that also you may have thought played their last game down in Arlington that are going to be back in Austin in 2025. I promise you that. So Texas, once again, proved to the world that not only were they good enough to be in the college football playoff in year one, They had arguably the best defense that had ever existed this season. On top of that, they also had an offense that, when it was humming, was good enough to beat the best teams in the SEC, and certainly was an overall roster that you can fault, but still decide to deliver. We're talking about 2 plays in the last 2 years from Texas not being in the national championship. That's it. They were both down at the red zone, both down at the 1-yard line. You can live with that. I'm not saying that it needs to be sustainable and that should be the legacy in Austin for here on out. But what I am saying is there are way worse ways to go out. Texas in year 1 of the SEC, a conference that everyone said they were going to be bullied in and they were going to be taught the ways of the conference. 13 wins, back-to-back college football playoff wins. Oh, and by the way, in the game that they were able to run the football, Clemson, yeah, they averaged 6.1 yards per play and they got a double-digit victory. So don't tell me that Texas, once again, did not have a good season. They have the pieces. They're going to be right back here in 2025. They're going to be right back here for the long haul. They have the pieces. I like this team. I like where this team is. You didn't show up against an Ohio State roster that many people knew was good enough to win a national championship from week 1. This episode is brought to you by our friends over at GameTime. So GameTime is the #1 ticketing app. Let me ask you guys. College football season is coming to a close, unless you're an Ohio State fan, then you want to go down to Atlanta. But let's say you want to go down to Atlanta, or let's say you want to go to a college basketball game, and you want to save some money. Well, what you do is you go to the GameTime app, and you use the promo code SECU for $20 off your first purchase. $20 off will get you into any concert, any NHL game, any comedy show, and all you got to do is simply use the promo code SECU. SECU GameTime app, it is the #1 app for all things ticketing. Go tell them that the fine folks at SEC Unfiltered sent you. I gotta get a sip of water. By the way, me and my wife are buying a new house recently. Tell me, does this lighting work? I got to go ahead and install ceiling fans, so I got to be able to find the light. Do I need another lighting fixture for the office I'm building? Regardless. Quinn Ewers. We saw his last game in a Texas Longhorn uniform. I'm going to stop it right there and just say that that's a done deal. I don't know if we're going to see him done in college, but I do know that we are going to see him done. There's a report by Pete Thamel that says that he is going to the pros. That might change. Remember the exact same way that Carson Beck, who we're going to talk about in a little bit, he decided to go and declare for the NFL draft. Here's the thing. He never picked up an agent. To go to the NFL draft, and this is something that I learned most recently, actually, you have to be able to sign with an agent. Until you do that, everyone is able to talk to you, which is why last year, Cam Ward never picked up an agent, talked to Miami, and eventually found his way over to Coral Gables, where he became probably one of the best passers in the ACC. That's going to be the exact same plan for Carson Beck, who is really going down there for a ton of reasons. We're not going to get into the actual details for it. Quinn, I don't know what his case is, but I do know that his legacy is going to be flawed at Texas. It's not going to be the same standard that it probably should. And I keep bringing this up, and people ask me, what do you think about Quinn Ewers? What do you think about his overall demeanor when he's at the University of Texas and we look for the long haul? Sadly, I had to compare him to a quarterback that many people love to crap on in the state. In the state. I compared him to Dak Prescott. Now, I know what a lot of people are going to say, because there's a lot of Cowboys fans probably in here too. What are you talking about? Dak Prescott? Okay. Dak Prescott is the easy target to go after because he plays for the Dallas Cowboys. The Dallas Cowboys, who have not been to an NFC championship game since 1995. The Dallas Cowboys that have not been able to get over the hump and actually win a Lombardi trophy since basically Jerry Jones sold his soul to the devil in the 1990s. The Cowboys that still put the wagon before the horse all the time and act like that they're back to the same dynasty level, but yet Dak Prescott struggles in the biggest games. But here's the thing. Dak Prescott is a 5-time 4,000-yard passer. He's been to multiple Pro Bowls. Last year was in the running for the MVP. Took his team to the #2 seed in the NFC playoffs and still gets shafted. Still gets crapped upon. Still gets told all the time that he is not good enough to be the starting quarterback. He shouldn't be playing in the NFL anymore. But I can promise you this. The second that Dak Prescott goes to another team, the second that Dak Prescott's playing against you, you're probably rooting for him. You're probably saying that that's a good fit. You probably don't want to face off against him. That's Quinn Ewers to me. Quinn Ewers is the first quarterback since Sam Ehlinger to have back-to-back 3,300-yard seasons. He's the first quarterback since Sam Ehlinger to have 20-plus touchdowns in back-to-back seasons. He's the first quarterback to have a passer rating of over 150. Oh, and by the way, he's also the first quarterback since Sam Ehlinger to have a conference championship appearance. And he's the first quarterback since, sorry about that, he's the first quarterback since Colt McCoy to have a conference title. He also has a win over Alabama. He also a double-digit win against a Nick Saban-led team. He also has a Big 12 record for the most passing yards in conference championship history. He led his team to back-to-back double-digit win seasons and college football playoff appearances. And yet still, we see people say, it's time for Arch. It's time to bring in Arch. And I'm not saying that Arch Manning is not a worse passer than Quinn Ewers. I'm not saying that at all. I'm not saying that that next season, Arch Manning won't be able to lead this team to a national championship. I'm not saying that in the slightest. What I am saying is the expectations that were set well before Quinn Ewers ever stepped foot as QB1 in Austin were never going to be vilified unless he won a national championship. And it's been that way at Texas forever. Multiple Texas fans will tell you that how many times they have heard this quarterback was supposed to be the next guy, and then he wasn't. How many times did we hear Sam Ehlinger is great, only to go to put in Casey Thompson? How many times did we hear Casey Thompson is great, put in Hudson Card? How many times did we hear Quinn Ewers is great, put in Arch Manning? It's been a wash, rinse, and repeat since 2009 when Colt McCoy hurt his elbow in the first quarter and Alabama went on to start its dynasty. Like, that's been kind of the norm for this standard. But yet still, Quinn was able to take your team in multiple games and put you in a position to where you were able to not only win, but be able to advance. I mean, regardless whether you like it or not, yes, the defense did its job for 3.5 quarters against Arizona State in the Peach Bowl. I'm not going to take that away from you. I understand 107 plays were run by this Arizona State offense. Eventually, you're going to be tired. But that doesn't mean that Cam Scatterboom needs to be throwing a 40-yard touchdown pass and then converting a 2-point stop. You realize that that's on the defense, whether or not they're tired. And then when you do need a good big-time play, what happens in the last 3 drives? Quinn Ewers turns basically into the second coming of Aaron Rodgers in his MVP seasons and goes on out and delivers 3 quick strikes. Bert Auburn missed a field goal, 4th and 13, connects with Matthew Golden, and a play later, Gunnar Helms in for a 21-yard score. That's on Quinn. Whether or not you want to agree that Quinn Ewers is the perfect fit for your team, you can agree that the reason why you even had a shot at playing for a national championship was because Quinn Ewers was able to connect twice with his receivers for touchdowns in overtime. And he was able to do so against Alabama with Nick Saban. He was able to do so against Oklahoma State in 4 different occasions. He was able to do so in the second half against Washington that went on to play a very close game against Michigan. And yet we're not going to appreciate him. Another quarterback that I compare him to right now is Eli Manning. And I know that people are going to say, why are you saying Eli Manning and why are you bringing up the Mannings? Just stay with me for a minute. Eli Manning won 2 Super Bowls out in New York. I know this because I grew up in a New York household. So a lot of my family members are Giants. By the time that he got to the end of his career, they wanted to get rid of him. They couldn't stomach him anymore. They said, bring in X quarterback. Let's try this guy. They always wanted the backup to be called. And then they go and they draft Daniel Jones. And eventually they realize, okay, it's time that we go start a new chapter. But now the Giants are picking 3rd overall in a draft where they don't have a solid quarterback one, in a draft where there are so many faults to this team, in a draft where they're nowhere near close to being back to that same pedigree to when Eli Manning won 2 Super Bowls. And I guarantee you, a lot of people in New York, a lot of people that root for Big Blue, look back and say, I didn't appreciate a guy like Eli Manning enough. I didn't appreciate the moments I had with Eli Manning during his tenure. And ultimately, what's going to happen is they're going to look back and say, we knew that we had a quarterback and we never gave him the flowers he deserved until it was too late. Maybe that's Quinn's legacy. Quinn's going to go down as one of the top 10 passers all time in Texas Longhorn football history. He's going to go down as one of the top 15 passers all time in Texas touchdowns. He's going to be able to say that he led his team to 2 college football playoff appearances, something that nobody else can actually say up to this point. And he was a few plays away from leading his team to a national title. That doesn't mean that he is at fault. Absolutely, he's at fault. Multiple drives, multiple penalties, multiple flags, multiple miscues ultimately cost Texas a shot, and he was at the forefront of a lot of them. He was. But it's not like he's the only person to blame. So when you look back in the history books of what was the era of Quinn Ewers, I hope people remember much like Dak Prescott, much like Eli Manning. You may be able to crap on them now, and that's totally understandable. But eventually, you'll look back and you'll say, I didn't appreciate him enough for what he did for our team. Texas very well could be in the national championship next year, and you still are going to realize that the reason why you're here, the reason why this team is stable, the reason why you're able to bring in the right recruits, the right people, the right personnel, and people gravitated towards Quinn Ewers was because of he was the right guy to lead Texas. He was the right guy to lead them into a Big 12 championship. He was the right guy to lead them into their college football playoff. He was the right guy to lead them into the SEC. Eventually, you'll be able to get to that path. Eventually, you'll be able to find that trajectory. You'll appreciate him. Probably going to be about a decade. Probably going to be about maybe even longer. But you'll find a way to realize, as much as we want to blame Quinn Ewers, we also need to thank Quinn Ewers. Make sure that you like the video, hit the ring notification down below, and also make sure that you go ahead and follow us on the social channels, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter at SEC Unfiltered. If you want to follow me, that way the back and forth banter can continue. It's at Mr. Cole Thompson. We got a lot of things in the works over here at SEC Unfiltered, like in the next several weeks. So you don't want to not be subscribed, and make sure that you also just tell your friends, family, mortal enemies, best of bros, college football aficionados everywhere about this channel, because well, we're not going away anytime soon. And I'm definitely not going away anytime soon. All right. Let me have a sip of water. By the way, I got to have a new beverage. Can somebody tell me what you guys are drinking right now that's not alcoholic? I'm trying to lose weight before the end of the new year. Okay. Alabama. Let's talk about them for a minute. The reason I want to talk about Alabama is because of how many people are ready to go ahead and write off the Crimson Tide. And I completely understand why. I mean, I do. I'm not going to sit here and act like that last season was a good year. 9-4 is never going to be the standard out in Tuscaloosa. It never was before Nick Saban arrived. So please make sure that when I say this, you all know that I understand where the frustration comes from, because of you saw worse years underneath Mike DeBose and Mike Shula, and they still weren't as bad as some of the things that we saw this past season, and they were shown the door. So this was not a Nick Saban thing. But let's also just call a spade a spade. Alabama hasn't met the Nick Saban standard since they won a national title in 2020. Okay? Can we just throw that all out there? Because so many people want to say, well, Alabama still made the college football playoff. They did. They did. They lost to Michigan. But do you also realize that they were one of the more penalized teams? Their defense was hit and miss for back-to-back years. They were inconsistent with the play calling on offense. They weren't able to execute in major games. They never lost to Tennessee underneath Nick Saban until 2022. They never were able to play those close calls against teams like Texas A&M. They never lost to an unranked team in the history of the program, and they did in 2021. So this was growing for years, and eventually Nick Saban decided to get on out of it. Here's the thing. Nick knew it was time to retire when the moment arrived. And so every Alabama fan should be sitting here and going, okay, that's fair. Because if he was able to know it, everyone was able to know it. The dynasty when it comes to Alabama is dead. It's not coming back. It is extinct. Here's the good news. It will always be extinct in college football. You're never going to see a run like you saw in the 2010s ever again, because there's multiple reasons. Number one, the transfer portal. Kids no longer want to sit and wait. So when you look at teams like Ohio State, when you look at teams like Georgia and even Notre Dame and Oregon, yeah, they were able to have a good run this year, and they probably will have a good run for a while because of the pedigree of the programs. But if they lose a player, it's no longer a wash, rinse, repeat of, oh, look at who we have waiting in the wings, that 5-star talent that we've been saving. No, he's not there anymore. He's at SMU because he wanted to go ahead and play. Oh, we got this 5-star offensive tackle that we know can come on in and compete with the best. No, you don't. He's at Virginia Tech because they were willing to pay him, and they thought that he was a better fit for their team right now, rather than sitting and waiting. So the depth is no longer there because of NIL and the transfer portal. And also, the level of competition has changed. So you're not going to see another run. Kirby and Georgia were close. They were probably the closest to having that dynasty last year. If they would have made the college football playoff, I probably still would have picked them. But it's not going to exist anymore. So stop thinking that Kalen DeBoer has to come on in and be that exact same version of Nick Saban to go ahead and reach your goals. And this is really a standpoint for everybody. Like Dan Lanning right now, people are saying he can't win the big game. He can't be able to get the job done. He can't be able to find a way to get to victory. Guys, he's under 40, and he also just took his team to an undefeated season in year one of a brand new conference. Calm down. And the same thing goes for calming down with Kalen DeBoer. You have to have realistic expectations in a new era of college football where it's no longer a 14 playoff. It's going to be 12, and then it's going to be 14. And you also have to have realistic expectations other than just winning a national championship. That should be the goal for everybody, but it shouldn't be the expectation. So what should be the expectations for Kalen DeBoer moving forward? I think there's three things. Number one, remind people why you were hired to replace the greatest coach to ever live. What does that mean? Well, when Kalen DeBoer was at Fresno State, then he was at Washington, he had a top 10 scoring offense. He had a top 10 passing unit with Jake Haener, and then that translated over to Michael Penix Jr. He had a top 25 total offense at Washington back-to-back years. He had stellar quarterback play. He had multiple wide receivers go for over 1,000 yards. He was able to go ahead and trust a run game, and he was developing offensive lines. So go make sure that you're doing that. Make sure that you have a quarterback that people are buying into down in Tuscaloosa that is going to be able to be here for the long haul and put you on a mantle. Make sure that you have wide receivers that are able to break out and have good time plays and be able to put yourself in the end zone for an easy 6 points. Guys like Jeremy Bernard, guys like Ryan Williams, guys like the kid that you're adding in from Bishop Gorman. I'm blanking on his name. I'll come to my head in a minute. Step 2, meet the Alabama non-negotiables. So there are certainly things that when you are at Alabama, you have to do if you want to be successful. The first is you have to have a top 10 recruiting class every single year. Actually, probably it's the top 7 recruiting class. Okay, well, he's already got that. Year 1, top 2 recruiting class in the country. You also have to be able to develop talent continuously. First-round names. Well, you're going to see that this year. Tyler Booker is going to be a first-round talent. You might even see another name slip their way on in. The other thing is that you have to properly utilize your resources in the NIL world. So you got to be able to shake the right hands, kiss the right babies, and put yourself in a good spot, because if you need that money to continue to work your way on in. And also, you have to be able to win the games that you're supposed to. If Alabama next year goes 10-2, and let's say they lose to, I don't know, Georgia on the road and an improved South Carolina team on the road, how would you feel about that season? Probably a lot better, because you're not losing to a Vanderbilt squad and an Oklahoma roster that is filled with flaws and insecurities right now. So you feel a lot better about that sense. It's winning the games that you're supposed to and not being outcoached by the opponents that you're not supposed to be. So losing in Nashville, non-negotiable. Losing to that version of Oklahoma, non-negotiable. Losing to Georgia, Kirby Smart, okay, you can live with that. You'll find a way to make it work. You'll find a way to make it work if you were to lose to a Nico Iamaleava and he throws for 375 yards in an improved Tennessee offense. You're not going to be complaining about that. Step 3, be more than a quarterback. Whether or not you want to agree with this was not Kalen DeBoer's offense this year. In fact, it was the furthest thing from it, because this was an offense that was predicated on only quarterback play. Yes, there were some issues when it came to the offensive line. Yes, you need to upgrade at right tackle. Elijah Pritchett, he's now in the transfer portal. Good for him. Wishing the best of luck with him in Lincoln, Nebraska. All fine and dandy with that. But this was an offense that was predicated on Jalen Milroe. And the numbers back it up. When he wanted to deliver, you delivered. That's why you have a win over LSU. That's why you have a win over Georgia. That's why you have a win over South Carolina. Because of when he delivered, he delivered. What about in the games when he didn't deliver? Well, you weren't able to see any consistency in the second half of the Tennessee matchup, and the faults that we saw on display in the ReliaQuest Bowl were also on display in Norman, Oklahoma, where if you just win that game, you're in the college football playoff, and there's no argument. So this was an offense that was predicated so much on just having great quarterback play. And so moving forward, you can't be that. And it never should be that way at Alabama. For years, Alabama was talked about in high regard because of what they had at running back, because of what they had at wide receiver, how great of a defense that they had. And guess what? The defense actually came around after that Vanderbilt game. You go back and you look at the numbers in the LSU matchup, in the Tennessee matchup, even in the Oklahoma matchup outside of Jackson Arnold's rushing. There's a lot to like about what Alabama did defensively with Kane Womack, which is why he wasn't fired from his position, nor should he have been. So when you're talking about Alabama, the big thing is that you cannot be just so quarterback codependent. And if you have that, you're in a good spot. Not to excuse this season, because if it's year 1, and again, it's a 9-4 campaign, you never want to live in this style. But let me ask you, what would you rather be in the NFL? What would you rather be from an NFL perspective? Peyton Manning or Vince Young? And what do I mean by that? Well, Vince Young won Offensive Rookie of the Year. He was one of the big reasons why the Tennessee Titans were profitable. He was one of the big reasons why Tennessee looked like they had a bright future. And many people thought that he was the second coming of Warren Moon. And then he proceeded to fizzle on out, never had that same type of success again. And ultimately, he bounced around the league before eventually he was just known as a has-been. Peyton Manning threw a career high 28 interceptions his first season in Indianapolis. And he went on to become one of the greatest quarterbacks that we have ever seen in the history of the sport. So remember, it's not about how you start, it's how you finish. I'd much rather have a career like Peyton Manning and rather than the accolade of Vince Young. But the main reason why I'm saying that Alabama and why they are going to be back and why you're not going to lose them anytime soon. Ohio State's proving my point. I know. Ohio State just proved my point. What do I mean by that? Well, there's new things that you have to realize in this era of college football. The first is you have to recruit talent. You have to be able to bring in the right pieces for your foundation and for your future. The second thing is you have to re-recruit talent. So what does that mean? Well, you got to make sure that they don't enter the transfer portal, that they're buying into the vision, and that they see that you are the right system for them. And Ohio State just did that. Ohio State is 60 minutes away from winning a national title. And yes, I do believe that they are going to win the national title this year. 100%. They're the best team in college football. But why is that? So many people turn to the fact that they went to the transfer portal. They got an upgrade at quarterback and Will Howard in their eyes. They added in Quinshon Judkins, who was a really good running back in the SEC. And he was a good complementary piece for Travion Henderson. They went and they added in Seth McLaughlin, upgraded their center position because the guy was leaving for the NFL draft. They upgraded with Caleb Downs. They run a 3-safety set. They didn't need Caleb Downs, but they wanted Caleb Downs. And guess what? He was the best player on the field in Arlington. But that wasn't the reason why Ohio State is going to be potentially winning its first national title since 2014. It has everything to do with the talent that they retained. So last season, after losing back-to-back games to Michigan and Missouri, players could have gone pro. Players could have easily left and said, I want to go to the NFL draft, and they would have been highly selected. Don't kid yourself. A lot of them would have been top 50 picks. But they said that that was not my vision of how I want to end my career in Columbus. I'm coming back. So you add back in a Jack Sawyer. You add back in a JT Tuimoloau. You add back in a Travion Henderson and an Emeka Egbuka and a Josh Simon and a a Proctor. And you add back in and you bring back in a Steel Chambers and a Tyleik Williams. And your defense is sound and you have all the pieces in play. And lo and behold, you go on an epic run with the new transfers that come on in. And now it's a perfect blend of transfer portal acquisition, young talent taking that next step forward. And then, of course, what you currently had already in the building. And now all you got to do is beat Marcus Freeman, beat that hairline, beat that jawline, and put yourself on the mantle of being the college football champions of the world. Well, did you look at what Alabama did last week? Alabama got the commitments, not of players going to the portal or going to the pros, but coming back next year that were foundations in year one, like Parker Brailsford, like Jay Miller, LT Overton, Keon Sapp, Damani Jackson, Deontay Lawson, Justin Jefferson, Jaden Roberts, Jeremy Bernard. And if that's not okay, how about Ryan Williams and Jalen Mbakwe also saying, yeah, we know there's a bunch of money out in NIL in the portal. We're good here in Tuscaloosa. And both of those are DeBoer's guys. People forget for a moment that Ryan Williams also decommitted when Nick Saban said, nah, I'm not going to be here anymore. And Kalen DeBoer convinced him to come on back. So they're not leaving. Then you bring in the transfer portal names. Isaiah Horton from Miami, Cam Dewberry from Texas A&M, Kelby Collins from Florida, Nakai Hill-Green from Colorado. You also have a top-tier recruiting class. Keelan Russell, that's your future at quarterback. That's the dude that you're buying into. Michael Carroll could be a plug-and-play starter and replacement for Tyler Booker in the interior offensive line. Dijon Lee, Ivan Taylor at safety, and then Derek Meadows was the wide receiver I was thinking of. What do all of those players have in common? Well, they were number one in their state, and they all were 5 stars. So you're doing a pretty good job of recruiting down in the South like many people didn't think you could do. Oh, and on top of that, you also are paying for those players to come back in. There's a reason why names that you saw recently in the mass exodus at Alabama all enter the portal. Because they're not Kalen DeBoer's guys. Because they're not Kalen DeBoer's people. This is Kalen DeBoer's squad. So this year moving forward, what this offense looks like, what this defense looks like, what we view Alabama is basically a Kalen DeBoer team. Because you came in last year, you knew that you were going to have to make some adjustments because you were replacing the greatest coach who ever lived. And ultimately, you were able to prove to everybody that, yes, there were some faults. There were some bumps and bruises. But also, I got to win over the number one team in the country in Georgia, who also won the SEC. I went on the road and beat LSU. And I also got to 9 wins. Could be a lot worse. Could be 1,000% a lot worse. So when you do believe that Alabama has to be this team that lives up to the expectations of being a program that is built like Nick Saban, you've already set yourself up to fail. You're not going to be sustainable. It's not going to work. It's never going to happen that way. So you might as well go ahead and steer into the skid of what does work with Kalen DeBoer and what's going to continue to work. Kalen DeBoer is fine. I don't think a lot of people are going to be upset because Kalen DeBoer is not Nick Saban 2.0. But can we all move off of what was last year and move to what is this year? He's got the right players in play. He's got a top recruiting class. He's checking off several boxes that are necessary at Alabama. And if you do end up going to the college football playoff, which I think Alabama will be right back in the running next year. So many people are saying, well, Alabama's not going to go. Alabama's not going anywhere. They're not. If you think that they are, you don't know what you're talking about. They'll be right back in the forefront. They'll be right back in the top 25 standings. They'll be right back around with everyone else. And ultimately, they'll put themselves in the market to where everyone will be saying, man, I can't believe that we doubted Kalen DeBoer. I don't know why you did either. I genuinely don't. Alabama will be fine. College football will be fine. And the main reason why is because good teams add talent from the portal. Great ones stop talent from thinking that there's greener pastures out there. Kalen DeBoer has done that so far. Much like Ohio State, don't be shocked if you see the exact same thing happen in 2024. This episode is brought to you by our friends over at RHOBACK. Go to RHOBACK.com and use the promo code SECU at sign up. That way you can get a 20% off with your first purchase. It's a new year. It's a new you. Guys, you want a new wardrobe? Make sure that you go to RHOBACK. Get a RHOBACK fleece, a RHOBACK pullover, a RHOBACK hoodie, a RHOBACK pair of shorts, a RHOBACK pair of pants, whatever you see fit. Go change your wardrobe by simply going to RHOBACK.com, promo code SECU, 20% off your very first purchase. And by the way, tell the fine folks at SEC Unfiltered sent you. All right, transfer portal rankings. We are not done. Portal's still technically open, and it's going to be open for like another month because of when you look at all the players that have to enter the portal after their teams are eliminated. You're going to see players leave Texas. You're going to see players leave Notre Dame. You're going to see players leave Ohio State. It's going to happen. But we do have a pretty good indication about where teams reside in the SEC. So let's go over some portal winners. LSU has got to be leading the forefront. Not only are they one of the best teams when it comes to the portal nationally, they have just crossed off every single box. And this is what you do when you're Brian Kelly and realize, I said that we were going to be a player in 2024. Year 3 judged me, and I was judged as a 9-win team. Nope, not okay with that. So you bring in a Patrick Payton, you bring in a Sadir Mitchell, you bring in a Mansour Delane, you bring in a Jack Pyburn, you bring in a Michael Van Buren, you bring in a Braylon Moore, and lo and behold, in just a span of 2 weeks, you've fixed your offensive line on paper. You fixed your defensive line and gotten it built better on paper. You're retaining Harold Perkins for another year. You're going to get back a healthy Whit Weeks, hopefully, at some point in the regular season. Your secondary got a lot better, and you brought in new weapons to replace guys like Kyron Lacey and CJ Daniels. Nick Anderson comes on in when he's fully healthy. This is one of the best wide receivers in the SEC. Barrion Brown got straight line speed, can absolutely find a way into the end zone, be a security blanket for a player like Garrett Nussmeier. You're in a really good spot, and you brought in some defensive talent and some really good depth. How about Ole Miss? Once again, Def, Texas, Ole Miss killing it in the transfer portal. Everyone from Jordan Simons, the running back from Akron with over 800 yards, to Deuce Alexander, the wide receiver from Wake Forest, Sage Ryan, the safety from LSU comes on in. Ole Miss is once again proving that they can win in the portal. Ole Miss is once again proving that, yes, we know that we're a team that certainly went all in our chips for 2024, but we're not going to be going away in 2025. I don't understand why people don't believe enough in Ole Miss. They still have a coach that has 3 10-win seasons. They still have a defense that features ample talent coming on back next year. They have a quarterback that they really like in Austin Simmons. Caden Lee comes in on as a wide receiver number 1. He's proven his value on multiple occasions. And more importantly, Ole Miss's schedule is the exact same as it was last year. So if they just don't find a way to shoot themselves in the foot against Kentucky, shoot themselves in the foot against LSU, which will be a home game next year, and don't shoot yourself in the foot against Florida, another home game next year, you're in a pretty good spot. I like the roster. I like the pieces that they added on in. They're in a really good position to be a team that takes that next step forward rather than a step backwards. Auburn. Yeah, Auburn's going to make this list. Of course they were. Why wouldn't they? Eric Singleton was the best player in the portal for my money. He is now the new wide receiver 1 to pair alongside with some really good names like, I don't know, Cam Coleman, Perry Thompson, Malcolm Simmons. And you also bring in Jackson Arnold. Jackson Arnold needed a fresh start. I think it's a really good fit in the style of offense that they want to run with Hugh Freeze. They had to swing this year. And the reason why they had to swing this year is because of when you look at the current status of Hugh Freeze. I said that Auburn had to be a player the way that Miami was and the way that Texas were in year 3. Because of the year 1 is all about establishing a foundation. Year 2 is all about making sure that you build your culture, a culture that is sustainable. And year 3 is where you actually start swinging for the fences. This is where you have to start swinging for the fences. If you believe that Hugh Freeze is the right guy for the job, you have to be willing to take some risk. Now, is every single one of these moves going to pan on out? I'm not sure. I don't know if Dallas Walker, the former 3-star defensive lineman from Western Kentucky, is going to be that big of a player. I don't know if Tay Seymour is going to come on in from Georgia Tech and be as big as an enforcer as Jerrion Thompson. What I will say is you had to make moves. You had to be able to put yourself in a really good position to at least take that next step forward. And I like that. I don't know if it's the right fit because of who's your head coach, but I still think that you're in a pretty overall decent spot when it comes to what you added in the portal. Missouri. Why are we not talking enough about Missouri? Missouri finished with a 10-win season last year. They got a victory over a Big Ten team, which right now feels pretty evident that you need that. And also, they're returning ample talent defensively. But they went out and they finished with the top 15 recruiting class and a top 5 transfer portal class. Vince Brown comes on in from Colorado State. That's going to be a big player in the tight end position. Jalen Catalon comes on in to be the enforcer on the back end at safety. Johnny Williams comes on in, offensive tackle from West Virginia. That could be a plug-and-play replacement for Armand Menbo. Keegan Frost comes on in, another guy that can be a plug-and-play replacement for Marcus Bryant. Bo Pabula. Kevin Coleman was my favorite move made this offseason by Missouri because I thought it was the most underappreciated wide receiver in the country this past year. Over 800 yards, top 3 in receiving yards in the SEC with literally no quarterback play. Inconsistent quarterback play at best this season out in Mississippi State. Now he's going to go to a system that's going to have somewhat of a quarterback battle. I think Bo Pabula, when you look at the NIL collective and you look at the numbers, that probably is a step in the right direction. That's probably the guy that you're planning on going to start this year. But still, you got to like what you have in Missouri. They've put together some really good pieces. Finally, Texas A&M. Texas A&M, I know what I've had. I understand that when you look at this team this past year, some people overhype them. I said 8-4 was always going to be on the standard. Guess what? They went 8-4. And then people weren't happy about that. The thing with A&M is it's hard to build a program in your image in year 1. It always will be. And the reason I say that is because when you look at a team like A&M, they're a program that probably should have been losing to underwhelming teams. If you switch out some of the wins that they had, like maybe take away the loss to USC, you win the bowl game, and you switch that with a loss to LSU in the regular season. Maybe you feel a little bit better about your squad. Maybe you feel like, okay, we're on the right trajectory. But the problem is you took those necessary jumps forward this year to where you felt like the team was better than advertised, and ultimately you came crashing down to earth in the month of November because you didn't have the Mike Elko pieces. So now you do. The wide receiver room is that much better because of what you brought in with Kevin Concepcion, with Mario Craver, with Micah Hudson. All 3 of those guys are either going to be potentially number 1s or they have been the number 1s. You bring in a veteran quarterback to back up a guy in Marcel Reed and give you stability at your QB2 position in Jacob Zeno. You also brought in guys like Dayon Hayes, really good pass rusher this past season for Colorado. You also brought in Samuel Mbapka, the edge rusher from Georgia. You also brought in Julian Humphrey, the cornerback from Georgia. So you've upgraded positions that put you in a good spot. And the players that you lost, it's okay that you lost them because now these are actually Mike Elko players. The way that I talked about Alabama is kind of the exact same way I talk about Texas A&M. Year 1 was all about establishing the culture on what you do want and what you do and what you don't need. When you have all those pieces, you put yourself in a prime position to take that necessary jump forward. A&M may not be that team next year. A&M still may be a year away. They still may be a quarterback away for all we know. But you're adding in the right pieces and you're putting your money where your mouth is. That's the big point here too. You had to be able to start spending if you want to actually go out and put yourself in a position to where you are competing alongside with Texas, where you are competing alongside with Alabama, where you are competing alongside with LSU and Georgia and Tennessee. And now you're throwing in Oklahoma to the mix, which, by the way, Oklahoma, you've done a lot defensively. You got to be really good about where you are defensively. Once you have a quarterback with John Mateer coming on in with Ben Arbuckle, I still need to see a little bit more before I actually trust that you've taken that next step forward. But regardless, I do think that there is some things that you could work on. For Texas A&M, you want to prove that you are one of those teams that can at least be in the position of where you're playing 4 quarters of football, where you're not getting a win over Missouri and then losing to a South Carolina team by double digits, where you're getting a win over LSU and you're not being embarrassed because your offense has no life against Texas. You can't have that and think that you're in the right position. But you're swinging, you're trying to put yourself in a good spot. I think that there's a lot of things that you're doing that at least says you've made the necessary moves to where we can start talking about 10-win seasons being on the horizon. We have a foundation in place. We know that we've done our part and that we're taking the next step forward. All right, I've been going for 15 minutes. I have to run because if I do have other things that are going on today, we will be back here next week. I want to know in the comment section, what do you want to see on this program? Because there's a lot of things that I want to talk about during the offseason. I'm not going to go away anytime soon, but I want this to be your show. I'm just a guy that's coming on here and speaking his thoughts on the SEC, and I'm not going to go away because of it. And there's a lot of things that will happen in the sport that are always going to change, but I do want to know, what do you want to see on this show? So if you can, leave me a comment in the comment section, not on the live stream, actually in the comment section. What are things you want to talk about next week? And give me some predictions too. What do you think of the SEC moving into 2025? What are some things that can change? What are some things that you want to see change? Who are some sleepers? Who are some risers? Who are some fallers? We're going to have a ton of content. We're not going to go away quietly. It's the SEC. It never sleeps. I never sleep. And I enjoy talking college football every single day, which is why I do this for a living. So make sure that you like the video, hit the ring notification down below, subscribe to the channel, follow us on all the social platforms, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter at SEC Unfiltered. Download the podcast version of the show wherever you get your podcast listening systems. Make sure you follow me at Mr. Cole Thompson and check out all of our great work found at SECUnfiltered.com. Until next time, I am Cole Thompson. Ladies and gentlemen, just remember, you only live one life. Go ahead and enjoy it. Smell the roses. Don't think that for 1 second you just have to live inside of a live stream or live inside of a computer. You know what I'm trying to say. I'll see you next week, guys. Peace.